The ground did not just vibrate, it buckled. Every morning, the valley floor shuddered under the sheer force of a single voice. Goliath stood at the edge of the camp, a monolith against the ridgeline, his lungs pulling in air to fuel a roar that turned the morning mist into chaos. It was a sound that bypassed the ears and settled deep in the marrow of the men below. Soldiers who had trained for years for battle now found their hands trembling as they gripped their tent flaps. They retreated, inch by inch, pulling the canvas tight to block out the reality of the threat outside. The air grew thick, stagnant, and heavy with the weight of absolute doubt. No shield was thick enough to deflect the psychological toll of that sound. No spear had the reach to silence the challenge bellowing from the ridge. The camp was a prison of its own making, defined by the distance between the soldiers and the giant who claimed the sky. Every shout was a hammer blow against their resolve. They huddled in the dark, waiting for the silence that never came, while the earth beneath them continued to groan under the giant's relentless, thunderous command. Miles beyond the shadow of the valley, the world breathed differently. The sky was an unbroken expanse of blue, wide and indifferent to the turmoil gathering near the camp. David sat on a limestone shelf, the heat of the sun soaking into the rock beneath him. He did not watch the horizon for threats. He watched the movement of his flock. His hands rested on his knees, palms rough and mapped with lines from years of pulling rope and guiding stubborn rams. There was no thunder here, only the rhythmic click of hooves against stone and the dry rattle of wind through tall grass. He picked up a wooden staff, feeling the familiar weight and grain of the timber. He stood, his movements efficient and unhurried. When a lamb strayed toward a steep ledge, he moved to intercept it, his stride steady, his gaze fixed on the task. He did not rush. He did not look for cover. He navigated the incline with the confidence of one who knew every hollow and hidden path. In the quiet of the high country, he practiced the art of patience, his grip firm on the staff, eyes scanning the rolling hills for the next sign of need. David walked into the camp with the steady rhythm of the hills still in his stride. He carried the weight of supplies on his back, his eyes searching for his brothers among the rows of tents. He had barely cleared the threshold when the air ripped apart. Goliath roared from the ridge, a sound that shook the dust from the canvas roofs. Around David, the camp dissolved into motion. Soldiers dropped their duties, diving behind heavy supply crates and pressing themselves into the dirt. Their movements were jerky, frantic, and desperate. David did not drop his load. He did not seek the shadow of a wall. He stopped in the center of the path, his feet planted firmly on the packed earth. He watched the men scramble, their faces drained of color, their eyes fixed on the ground. He turned his gaze toward the ridgeline, where the giant loomed against the horizon. The silence in the camp was broken only by the ragged breathing of the hidden men. David looked at the soldiers near him, his voice cutting through the tremors of the earth. "Why do you let your hearts be stolen by this?" he asked. The men did not answer. They only pulled their shields tighter, leaving David standing alone in the open space. The guards brought David to the center of the command tent. King Saul sat on a raised chair, his eyes narrow, scanning the boy from head to foot. He saw only a youth, lean and unscarred by the rigors of formal war. The king shifted his weight, the leather of his seat creaking in the tense quiet of the room. "You are a boy," King Saul said, his voice dropping into a low, gravelly skepticism. "He is a veteran of 1,000 skirmishes. You have no history here." David did not recoil. He stood with his hands relaxed at his sides, his breathing slow and measured. He looked directly at the king, his expression devoid of tremor. "I have tended the flock in the high country," David replied, his voice steady. "When a lion came to snatch a lamb, I pursued it. I struck it down and pulled the prey from its jaws. When a bear rose against the sheep, I faced it with the same resolve." He took a step forward, his shadow stretching across the floor. "The same power that kept me in the hills against the claws of beasts remains with me now. I do not stand on my own strength, but on a foundation that does not waver." King Saul remained silent, his gaze fixed on the boy, the skepticism in the room beginning to fray. King Saul gestured to his guards. They brought forward a heavy frame of iron, the metal dull and cold under the lamplight. They secured the pieces onto David, tightening straps until the steel sat hard against his shoulders. David moved a single step. The metal clattered. It pulled at his frame, dragging his center of gravity downward. He tried to raise his arm, but the iron plates ground against each other, locking his shoulder in place. He felt the restriction in his chest, the weight of the metal dampening the rhythm of his own breath. It was a cage of cold, unyielding plates that had no place in the hills. David reached for the buckles and pulled. The heavy pieces fell to the dirt floor with a dull, ringing thud that echoed through the tent. He shook his arms, feeling the air return to his skin. He reached down and retrieved his simple wooden staff, the smooth grain familiar against his palm. He checked the leather pouch at his side. The weight of his own tools felt natural, balanced, and ready. He looked at the king, his movements now fluid and unhindered. He turned and walked out of the tent, leaving the iron behind in the dust. David walked away from the camp, his boots crunching against the hard-packed earth of the valley floor. The sound was sharp, solitary, and loud in the stillness. He reached the dry creek bed where the sun-bleached rocks lay scattered like forgotten teeth. He knelt, the gritty sand pressing into his knees. The air here was stagnant, stripped of the wind. He began to search, his fingers brushing over the surface of the stones. He was not looking for size, but for balance. He picked up one, felt its weight, and discarded it. He chose another, rolling it between his palms to test its smoothness. 5 times he reached down. 5 times he selected a stone, each one perfectly rounded, each one cool despite the heat radiating from the ground. He slid them one by one into his leather pouch. The leather pulled taut against his side, a heavy, rhythmic anchor. He remained on his knees for a moment longer, watching the ridgeline where the shadow of Goliath loomed. The silence of the valley was absolute, an immense weight that seemed to hold its breath. He stood up, his spine straight, and turned his gaze toward the giant. The time for preparation had ended. David stepped out from the creek bed and onto the open field. The ground was uneven, baked hard by the sun, but his stride remained constant. From the ridgeline, Goliath saw the boy and let out a roar that vibrated through the very air. The sound was guttural, a wall of noise meant to intimidate and shatter focus. He bellowed insults, his voice echoing off the hillsides like rolling thunder. He paced back and forth, a massive silhouette against the horizon, mocking the lack of metal shields or long spears. David did not break his pace. He did not look back. He kept his eyes fixed on the target, his breathing steady and slow. He reached into his pouch, his fingers finding the smooth surface of a stone. He pulled it out and set it firmly into the leather cradle of his sling. The leather groaned under the tension of his grip. He began to swing the cord in a low, controlled circle. The rhythmic motion matched the beat of his steady footsteps. Each swing grew faster, the leather cord humming a sharp metallic whistle against the wind, creating a solid anchor for the force about to be unleashed. He swung the sling in a wide, fluid arc, the leather cord whipping through the air. The speed increased with every rotation, the sound rising from a low drone to a sharp, aggressive whistle. The giant stood motionless. He snapped his wrist forward, releasing the retention cord with precise, calculated timing. The stone tore away from the leather pocket. It cut through the air in a straight, unwavering line, a gray streak against the bright sky. The wind seemed to vanish, leaving only the path of the projectile. It struck with the force of a falling hammer, hitting the center of the forehead with a hollow, unmistakable thud. The sound echoed across the valley, sharp and final. For a heartbeat, the world stood suspended in absolute stillness. The massive warrior stumbled, his knees buckling under the impact. A ripple of shock pulsed through the watchers on the ridgeline, turning their paralysis into sudden, breathless disbelief. His massive frame swayed like a tower losing its foundation. He tilted backward, his heavy boots dragging through the dust. The ground surged upward, sending a tremor that traveled deep into the valley floor. Dust erupted in a thick, choking cloud, swirling around the fallen form. Goliath lay motionless, the silence of the valley now absolute, heavy, and profound. David remained standing, his feet planted wide, his chest rising and falling with the rhythm of his own calm breathing. The sling hung limp at his side, the leather still warm from the motion. He did not rush forward. He did not shout. He simply watched as the shadow that had darkened the valley for weeks dissolved into nothing. The impossible had occurred. The soldiers on the ridgeline began to stir, their eyes wide, their disbelief slowly giving way to the realization that the long terror had finally ended. The air grew still, and the wind returned, soft and steady across the plains. David stands alone under the vast open sky, his task complete, his breath steady. The weight of the day slips away, replaced by the quiet stillness of the hills. You are here, in the safety of this moment, tucked away from the noise of the world. Just as the strength that guided the stone remained with the shepherd through the darkest hours, that same steady presence surrounds you now. Let your shoulders drop. Let your hands relax. The blankets hold you, a gentle pressure against the chill. There is no need to carry the worries of the day into the shadows of the night. Every breath you take is a reminder that you are held, watched over, and never truly alone. As the stars glimmer in the velvet dark, feel the tension drain from your limbs. The ground is firm beneath you. The air is calm. You are safe. Close your eyes, let go of the long hours, and drift into the deep, restorative quiet. Rest now, and come back tomorrow night for another tale from Faithful Storybook.